of the RTC budget review.
Let me do it.
Great.
Okay.
And do you have to do this citizens
Yes,
participation?
thank you,
Could I have one
Mr.
of
Chairman,
those?
members of the board.
I left mine at the office.
Your first
Sure.
item is to conduct your first citizens participation period.
First time set aside for public comment. Those wishing to speak to the committee, now is your opportunity. Dr. Fred, any words of wisdom?
Welcome back, Mr. Yeah, Dr.
Seeing and hearing no one, will close this portion of public comment.
Item number 2 is to approve your agenda. Your agenda is in order and ready for your approval.
This is okay, approving. A motion to approve?
Motion on the floor. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion approved.
Item number 3 is approval of the minutes. When last we met, it was March 15th of last year, and that was for last year's fiscal year budget.
Motion to approve.
Motion on the floor. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Item number-
Motion approved.
4 is to receive a presentation on the projected revenues and expenditures for the fiscal year 2019 budget and direct staff as to what issues the committee would like the Regional Transportation Commission of Southern Nevada to consider for inclusion in the budget for fiscal year 2019. And with that, I have Senior Director, Mr. Mark Trosdahl, to present the budget.
Thank you, Tina. Members of the committee and Mr. Chair, we'll start out talking about revenue.
My back, Dave.
Okay. I like the graphics, by the way. That's pretty cool.
Isn't that all right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Our GAM team does a great job on this.
Yeah.
You can see here, looking at our budgeted funding sources, we're budgeting $579 million of revenue next year for fiscal 19. You can see sales tax is still the big one. We're budgeting $212 million there. Motor vehicle fuel tax is not second, but the FRI 1 is now. You can see that is at 89.9, and that's the normal taxes and revenues. Grants are a little higher this year due to not only transit, but also grant revenues of about $34 million for the Boulder City Bypass, I-11. So that's the big story this year is grants. The other thing in this chart that you will not see is a planned bond issuance. We are not planning a bond issue in fiscal 19 for streets and highways projects. And we look at sales and use taxes. This time, there's a lot of 3.5 percentages there. Year to date through December, we're at 3.5% over fiscal 17 for 18, and we're projecting 3.5% where the year will end up in 18. We're also budgeting 3.5% for fiscal 19. Then a review of sales tax. You see 1992, we have the first question 10 sales tax, the first quarter percent. And then in 2002, the second quarter percent, but half of that quarter percent went to transit and the other half goes to streets and highways, fast and air quality. We look at those both together, and our 0.5%, 3/4 of it goes to transit and 1/4 to streets, highways, fast and air quality. As we look at transit operating revenues, you can see that sales tax provides the majority of revenue there in subsidizing the transit system. Passenger fares provide about almost 28% of the revenue, and then there's a few other items. Transit advertising, about $3.9 million or 1.7%. Medicaid reimbursement, about 2.3%, or about $5.4 million.
Mark, how's, or anyone, on our fares? When's the last time we raised our fares?
It's been,
That's kind of a trick question in that it was 2012, I think we raised the strip fares after a fair working group. And then before that, the general market was 2010.
Well, we actually raised fares in the general market resort quarter in 2010, and then we went back in 2012 and increased fares in the resort quarter again. So they've had 2 fare increases, general market 1, since 2010.
Yeah. Okay. Then we look at the sales tax that's distributed to streets and highways, FAST, and Department of Air Quality. You can see those numbers there, streets and highways. After air quality and FAST, we're budgeting about $39.4 million in that one. Then we go to motor vehicle fuel tax. This one, year-to-date fiscal 18, we're at an increase of about 2.3% over fiscal 17 at the same time. That's through December. And so we're budgeting about 2% increase in 18 and budgeting a 2% increase in 19 for fuel tax. Then we go to FRI 1, and you can see how that grew over the years. This is now for the RTC, it's an 8.8 cent tax. And it won't change, that rate won't change anymore for FRI 1. It'll just keep going. And we are budgeting about a 2% increase for 18 and 19, consistent with the motor vehicle fuel tax.
Does FRI 1 have a terminus date, or?
No, it will terminate if the bonds expire. Well, it can't terminate before any debt's retired.
Okay.
And then FRI 2, you can see we're at the beginning of FRI 2. We're projecting about 6.6 million in 18 and about 13.1 in 19. And you're going to get a presentation in the June meeting all about FRI. And maybe just a little teaser on that. The PPI, the 10-year rolling average PPI is down. It's quite a bit lower than we projected. When we first started this a few years ago, we projected 4.5% PPI average. Then we went down to 3.43. In 18, we're at 2.15. And in 19, we're projecting 1.98. So the 10-year rolling average is down, and that is impacting the projected revenues for that program. And now we go into fare revenue. You can see kind of a dramatic decrease in the revenue. This is for the whole fixed route system. Year-to-date, we're down about 5.4%. We're projecting about a 5% decrease for fiscal 18 in fare revenue, and then another 2% decrease in fiscal 19. That yellow line gives you a little idea as to kind of where we are going back. We're just above 2011 revenue in the whole system there.
Is that fare revenue, is that paratransit and transit combined, or just transit?
Yes, that is fare. Yes, that is for paratransit and fixed.
Okay.
And again, we suspect due to just changing travel behaviors and the different modes that now operate in the resort corridor.
Yeah, and the strip corridor fare revenue kind of tells the story. The general market or the city buses are flat. The revenue there is pretty close to flat, but on the strip, the competition with the TNCs, the revenue, that's where the revenues drop mostly there. Then we look at ridership on the strip. And, that's fixed route ridership. You can see the little bit of decrease there. And then we go to the strip corridor, and you see the ridership decline there that's consistent with the revenue.
Let's talk about that for a minute. Shoot back to the last slide. That one. So is that trend right there, flat declining, is that industry-wide?
No,
Industry-wide,
industry-wide, well, we're actually,
across the United States.
right, across the United States, the drop in ridership is more significant than what you see here. Our local ridership, we're actually sort of bucking the national trend. National trend for ridership is down almost 5%, and we're flat. You see a drop in ridership here. This is cumulative between both fixed route or local and strip, just due to the decrease in the resort corridor. But generally speaking, our locals, we're definitely bucking the national trend.
So do we have a non-strip corridor ridership number?
I don't know, Mark.
You know, we don't have a separate slide for that, but we could just subtract the strip from the fixed route ridership, and we would get that number. We just subtracted the strip out of it.
But generally for the general market, you're projecting flat.
We are.
Ridership, flat
Yeah.
revenue.
And that's where we've been. We've been about,
The
So right-
non-strip
Correct.
fixed route ridership is flat?
yeah.
Right.
So, again, from an industry standpoint, if industry-wide we're losing ridership, what do you do? How do we increase ridership in our system?
I wonder if having a stadium and having T-Mobile, if any of that will change.
You guys, I'm going to be a pessimist and just say that we're in a transition period, that people's mode of choice is changing, and the transit industry as a whole is going to be changing. And just let you know that MJ and I recently went to a APTA, had a transit CEO conference where they talked about trends and current event issues. And I felt like the industry hasn't really woke up yet. These numbers haven't scared them enough to really be aggressively challenging their thoughts on what the future looks like as it relates to transit and really figuring out what their niche is. So MJ and I would pinky promise that we would not let that happen here. Truly believe that there will be corridors that will always be really right for mass transit for traditional, or at least for a while, for traditional mass transit. One like Maryland Parkway is certainly really appropriate for high-capacity transit. But there will be other routes and other areas where some of this micro-transit type modes that are evolving are probably going to usurp the need for...
Like smaller buses or...
Yep.
And on demand.
On demand, yeah,
demand.
using the app. So, we're going to have to figure out how we mesh and morph to offer the right services, and we have the right costs that, taxpayers are paying for the right types of services in the right quarter.
Tina's right. I mean, the future is mobility as a service, so it really is about multiple options, multiple types of modes to get people around. In the resort corridor, we've seen that.
I think you'll start to see agencies partner with, a blend of public and private partnership on these Uber Express type concepts at on-demand mass transit. And we are in partnerships. We are having conversations with some private sector technology developers who want to test and deploy different concepts in Southern Nevada. But yeah, so Larry, Chairman, to answer your question, I think it's going to be a balancing act of continuing to figure out what the right fares and what the right frequencies are, what the right locations are, but then also learning to partner with other modes as those become a higher choice for you.
And Tina, Chairman, we also continue to reach out to our customers just to get feedback. So twice a year, we talk to the tourists, we talk to the local market, just to find out, hey, tell us more about your experience and why choose one mode over the other. And I think in the resort corridor, it's so unique because it's not quite 12 miles, very dense. The trips in the resort corridor are very short trips from one hotel property to another, or maybe from the strip to downtown. And I think the average tourist comes with two of their friends or family, so it's usually a party of three. It's very inexpensive. It's hard to, the knee-jerk reaction when you see fare revenue decrease and you think, I've got to raise my fares. But it's cheaper to take an Uber or a Lyft because you're usually traveling
With a small party.
With a small party, and because the trips are so short, many times, again, it's cheaper to take an Uber or Lyft. Picks you up exactly where you are, when you want to be picked up, drops you off exactly where you want to be, and then it does it on the reverse. But it's hard just because of that the resort course is so unique when you compare it to other routes around the United States.
And our fare on the resort quarter is $6 per person, per trip. $8 for a 24-hour pass, but $6 per trip. So with a party of 3 or a party of 4, multiply that out, and it does become cheaper to take an on-demand TNC.
Right, Cindy?
So if our passenger fares make up 27.8% of our operating revenue source, the question would be then, what's the future of public transit?
So, to...
And you don't have to answer that.
No, that's right.
But it's one of those things, and the next few years will be fine. But when we look ahead, especially some of the
Yeah.
initiatives that may or may not happen in the next few years, that question probably has to be answered, what we see ourselves on the transit side being in a decade.
Exactly.
Of course,
Yeah, agree.
the tourism populations is a very different population from, say, urban corridors where there's residential living and people going to employment centers.
And Tina's right, that question is being asked around the United States almost on a daily basis by other transit agencies. There's just a couple that, similar to RTC, that are looking at emerging technologies as another offer.
And again, take the strip out of it, if we look just at our non-strip fixed ridership number, if the industry trend is moving that way, we always look to expand routes or frequencies, but if that trend is going to, it's going to force us to think the other way. Where can we provide the most efficient service on a limited basis and not try to have a system throughout Southern Nevada?
There'll be
Correct.
something for everyone. You can't be
Yeah.
Right, there'll be corridors where it'd be very appropriate.
like Boulder Highway or Maryland Parkway. Or
Yeah, Chopkin, Charleston.
Yeah.
But certainly, in those, in the outlying areas, and this is the great transit team, Cindy and her team, that's where you do the analysis of, does it make sense to to extend a route, put a bus in at that cost, or do you look for another type of technology, whether it's microtransit, it's some sort of first mile, last mile kind of initiative that makes more economic sense too.
Could we raise our hands over there, part of the transit team, directly or indirectly?
Well, Taz.
Directly or indirectly, everybody's put. Okay.
Tara is transit.
So, could you put together a thesis for us and kind of give us some help on where we're going to be in 5 or 10 years?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Implementation is going to be very dynamic as a technology and
Oh, if you're going to speak that long, you're going to come right up to the
Maybe-
mic, state your name for the record so we have it recorded.
Maybe it's even
No,
worth
from what-
surveying users on the strip and different places
Yeah.
as to what they are seeing, how would this accommodate them? How would transit better serve them in the future?
Yeah.
It might be interesting to hear from them.
Are we overpriced on this trip? That's the hard question. That $6 fare, is that a good fare, or should that be 5 or 4?
The sweet spot.
And what would that do to our revenue? Would there be more demand for that service at $4 or $5?
Yeah, I agree, a lot of big, hard questions, so.
Yeah.
Well, we might draw more users if we lowered as opposed to.
And we probably should report to the board every now and then on the conversations that we're having internally, but then also the industry as a whole,
Yeah.
as to what we're hearing. There are certain transit agencies that are aggressively getting out in front and trying to morph as needed, and there are transit agencies that are sticking their heads in the sand
Right.
and just saying this too shall pass.
And a question that we can't answer today, but do people want to use public transit? Traditional, our fixed routes, do they want that? Certainly there's a group, the core group is always going to use it. But beyond that core group, how do we reach a new rider? Or is it even worth our effort?
No, I think it is worth our effort, and I think the school kids, the high school kids, really, if we teach a culture of transit, I think we might open that door to people feeling comfortable. We don't teach our children to ride buses, so when they hit the market, they're thinking, I gotta drive a car, I've gotta have my own form of transportation, but, I grew up in Detroit, and I rode buses every morning and every night, and it was something that I just grew comfortable with, but, I could see that the yellow buses are maybe needed for the K through 8, or K through middle school, 9, but then maybe as you get them into the high schools, maybe there's a way, if our transit system serves areas where the high schools are located, if kids could figure out how to get to, I'd walk a mile, but then I'd hop a bus and ride it to my school, and, just a thought.
Right.
That would be a new market to reach, and it would also teach a culture of transit as well.
Thank you. Continue, please.
Okay. Now we'll look at expenditures. So we're budgeting for fiscal 19 to use about $765 million. And that's made up in this chart. The biggest piece is capital outlay. You can see it almost $400 million, or 52% of the funding uses. Contracted services, about 31%. Most of that is transit. And then our annual house payment, if you will, our mortgage, our debt service, is almost $91 million, or 12%. Salaries and benefits, almost $40 million, or about 5% of our uses for fiscal 19.
What was our total number, 700 and what, million?
765.6.
Okay.
And the 12% debt service, Mark, do we have a industry standard or compare?
We have the thing that's standard among entities is what their debt service coverage ratio is, and that might be a mouthful, but we try, our revenue needs to be at least 1.5 times more than the debt service. So every entity is going to be a little different in how they spend their money and what they spend it on. So there wouldn't be really an industry standard for that percentage per se, but a lot of governments will, usually the minimum is right around 1.5 times debt service coverage. And a lot of them, the state of Nevada uses two times. So they have to have twice the revenue as they do debt service. And that's, the higher the number, the better the bondholders like it for security.
Are the transit agencies around the country going further and further into debt to try to salvage the new transit?
That's the thing about us. We are actually debt-free in transit. We don't have debt, but on the streets and highway side, we do kind of bring projects forward by issuing debt. So the streets and highways or MPO side of the house, that's like a whole different business in the rest of the country. And they do finance a lot of road work in the rest of the country. There are transit agencies that are in debt. California is really good at borrowing in transit agencies. I do not admire their balance sheets at all. In California, I look east.
So when you would contemplate a new bond issue for the RTC, the purpose would be
Just
for
streets and highways,
streets.
FRI usually.
But since we have FRI 1 and 2,
Dr. Fred, why do you keep putting us in debt?
Because you want to build roads faster.
Yeah, that's the idea. You bring it forward. We are not contemplating a bond issue in fiscal 19, though. We have the revenue is stacking up pretty good, so we're right now on a pay-go basis.
How are we doing? Would you step up to the mic? I'm going to grab you now. Your vacation's over. How are we doing on a general statement? How are we doing on spending our FRA money?
We're doing great. On the FRI 1, we've spent quite a bit. We have about,
We have a slide on that.
oh,
Do we?
Yeah.
Come back, please.
Okay. We'll move forward then to our capital expenditures, and a lot of that is streets and highways. You can see transit up there, 86.4 million, and we have a detailed slide on that later, and what we're buying with that as far as equipment. The rest of it, motor vehicle fuel tax, FRI 1 and 2, and sales tax, that is all for road work. And so we'll look at that a little closer. This is a really nice picture of our project, I-11. So to date, we've spent about, of FRI 1 money, about $410 million. There's about 190 million left to spend, we estimate, on the 225 projects that are in that program. You recall that, I think that started out right around 200 projects several years ago.
199.
Yeah, 199, there you go. So we're up to 225, and so that program's actually worked out a little better than anticipated. From what Dr. Fred tells me, there's only 2 more projects to award, and then all of them are awarded.
Before we report out next quarter, right?
We'll have one of the two then, we'll have both.
No.
Both.
That's not the answer, yeah. Okay, well, everything will be awarded by the time we report back to the board next quarter. I know, I'm so excited.
Got that, Joe? Okay. So that's exciting. That's a lot of work that's been done, a lot of good projects, and a lot more to come.
Where is that?
I-11.
I-11.
Yeah.
What part? Is that closer to the dam or closer to the mountain or?
No, it's the middle of the project. This is what we refer to as Bridge 5. It's halfway on the alignment. So once you go past here, you get to see the lake. And then you start approaching
You can see
the
the-
bridge.
It's cool.
Oh, it is.
Do you guys want a tour?
Yeah,
You
it'd be,
want-
I bet it's amazing now. I went early
You
on.
go out before it's done, just so you can see.
Yeah, I bet it's,
Mayor Woodbury promised a huge grand opening celebration, like a 3-day weekend in Boulder City.
All right.
everybody stay.
Boulder City.
Keep you in, you can't leave.
Could we commit to that on the record? All in favor?
How much coffee can you drink?
Go ahead, Mark, thank you.
Okay, now we'll get to the exciting part of the outstanding bonds. You can see here our sales and excise tax bonds. There's about 216 million outstanding. Our annual debt service is almost 25 million on that one. And then on our motor vehicle fuel tax, there's 324 million outstanding, and our annual debt service on those bonds is about 39 million. The FRI bonds outstanding is 322 million, and our annual debt service on that is 26.5 million. We actually have capacity in that program to borrow another $295 million.
Did you negotiate to get the lowest bond ratings you could to, I mean, sell and,
Yes,
Yeah.
these are actually negotiated deals. The FRI is negotiated. The motor vehicle fuel tax and the sales tax are competitive bonds.
because I know we refinanced a lot of ours to get much lower rate.
Yeah, we've refinanced everything we could. The only ones we have not refinanced yet are the Build America bonds.
Oh.
And those are going to be up in 2 short years. In 2020, they will be up for a regular, not an advance refunding, but a regular refunding with the 10-year call. And we move to transit capital. We are budgeting $86.4 million in capital for transit, and $67.3 million approximately will be grant funded. So as normal, this year, we're only buying 50 paratransit CNG vehicles. We normally buy 80, but last year we bought 120. So we buy what we need to keep the fleet current and in good operating order. We're spending $5.7 million on those 50 paratransit vehicles. And on the fixed route, we are buying 15 40-footers and 40 60-footers. And these buses are 85% grant funded because they are CNG and clean air, so we get a better grant rate than 80%. We get the 85% grant funding on those.
So at this point, 100% of our paratransit vehicles will be CNG?
They are already. They have
Yeah,
been,
100%,
yes.
yeah, okay, and
Mhm.
70% of our
Fixed route.
fixed route.
Yep.
Now, that fixed route vehicle, 1540s and 4060s, that's surprising in that the conversation earlier, are we going to move to smaller buses on some of those routes that don't need the 40 or 60?
Yeah. Currently, the planners are calling for the 40 60-footers.
But, so the double decks are going to be retiring, and Cindy, step in if I'm not saying this correctly, but we still have, the majority of our routes are very efficient. We probably have a higher boardings per revenue hour than most agencies. So the 60-foots get utilized. As a matter of fact, probably if the contractors had their way, we would have more 60-foot vehicles. But this is just looking at what we currently have, what's retiring, and what's the most appropriate replacement. So they are, and maybe that's part of the reporting team that we give to the board, just on some of the highlights of the high-capacity routes that we have right now, frequent routes.
And what's the lifespan of the vehicles?
Well, the FTA calls it 500,000 miles or 12 years, but we usually hit the mileage first, aside from the streetcar.
But, good question,
Yeah.
like, looking ahead, how many
Yeah.
of these size vehicles are we going to need along this corridor?
Well, future procurement will definitely change. That's going to be a conversation the entire industry has to have, because why invest in a vehicle that could potentially be around for 12 years when we're right in the middle of what's going to happen next? So I would imagine that will be part of APTA's initiative. Just what does the future procurement look like?
And Mayor Woodbury did reply to my text. He apologizes and says he got caught up with some emergencies at his law office.
Could you let them know we've discussed the 3-day Boulder City Weekend
Thank you for
Bash?
hosting.
Yeah.
We're looking forward to seeing him then.
Will do. This got voted on and won, so. Okay, moving on. Compressed natural gas is another thing that we continue to improve on. That's about $7.5 million next year. And we're also buying bus shelters at $2.5 million. The actual facilities are eligible for 90% grant funding for CNG, and the bus shelters are eligible for 80%.
There was some discussion, I think, in Henderson about the possibility of having a look to the buses that are uniquely Henderson, and I don't know if that's something that's open. I know you have the ones that sort of have the
Oh, you're talking about the
wave-
shelters?
Shelters.
Shelters, yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
shelters.
Mayor, we'd be more than, I mean,
Okay.
let's talk.
Let's,
Yeah, we've had
Yeah.
similar
Yeah.
conversations, like within the medical
Uh-huh.
district.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
all right.
Boulder City built their own, right?
The concrete, or the brick one? or-
Oh, yeah, they're concrete, kind of like after the dam motif.
Yeah, well, I'll talk to our staff.
Okay. Then we're also doing improvements at our bus yards to the tune of about $6.6 million of repairs and upgrades and improvements there. We're also buying technology for about $10.1 million. Those are two big software systems that we're buying there. And all those improvements and that technology will be 80% grant funded.
Is that predominantly mapping, or is it also sales of fares, or?
Well, one of them is the mapping or GPS type thing, the orbital, what do they call it, CAD, AVL? They have a lot of names for it, but yeah, it's
Okay.
kind of the wayfinding
Computer-aided
thing.
dispatch.
Yeah.
Vehicle locator.
Right. And then the other one is an asset management system. The FTA has a transit asset management system requirement, so we're buying a software system to help us with that.
Okay, thank you.
And now we go to operating expenditures. You can see that the contracted services are the majority of this at 218 million, or 88% of the transit operating budget. Salaries are about $17 million, or 7% of that budget. And then we do transfer about $11 million we're budgeting for 19, transferring to our administrative fund to help cover those expenses.
And we're looking at, the contracts have all been approved and are continuing for the
Yeah,
drivers?
this is our transit contracts, and you are correct. We will have a paratransit RFP.
Going out at the end of this year.
Keolis, we just gave the 5-year
So you get a 5-year,
transit, paratransit at the end of the year?
RFP, so you'll have to,
RFP?
yeah.
An MV?
And what's MB? What's their status?
MV's in they're in their option, they're in their second option year right now, I believe. So I think they've got one more option year on this option.
One more 2-year option
Yes.
deal?
So they've got their total between base and option years, MV has a 12-year contract. So we are in their current first option block. So one more year left on that. They'll probably come back to us and ask us to, I would imagine after sitting through the last board meetings that we exercised all of Keolis's option years, they may come back. Cindy, I don't know if you've heard anything? No. But right now, they're,
Well, we haven't seen any union reps at the meeting, so they must be doing something right.
so, yeah, MB actually is opening, they asked to open the contract early so they could increase the hourly rate for drivers because they're having a tough time retaining drivers. So they're going to do what Keolis did. They're going to increase the starting salary, their starting hourly rate for bus drivers. So they're currently in that negotiation right now.
Okay, and here's our budgeted fixed route contract cost. We're projecting fiscal 18 to land at about $110 million, and next year, 19, we'll spend approximately $114.3 million. A lot of that, and then the next slide is the service hours for fixed route. This year, the planning department for transit did ask for 60,000 hours, but due to budget constraints, we budgeted only 28,000 hours for next year. So that is kind of a combination of hours and then also what the rates in the contracts increase by. And that's a little different than previous years. Several of the previous years, we increased service by about 80,000 hours.
Wow.
And then the paratransit contract cost, you can see that chart, and you can see back in 2010 through 13, we had quite a steep increase there. That's what spurred the Fair Working Group back in 2012, and you can kind of see a similar pattern happening now from 15 through 19. That dip in 15 is due to the TransDev contract taking effect in that fiscal year. And on paratransit, we collect an average fare per passenger of $2.13. That trip actually costs us $32 on average, and so that's a subsidy of almost $30 per person per trip.
Which I just have to put that in perspective as to how much that is. I live in Anthem, Henderson, and for me to take an Uber to work each day is about the same. Actually, it's cheaper than that. So, just saying that paratransit is insanely expensive to operate.
And our last slide is a projection of our fuel cost. You can see that the compressed natural gas program here has saved significant money. You can see in 17 where we came in at an actual $6.8 million. The difference between 17 and 18 is the loss of the IRS clean air rebates. Those are about $3 million a year to our benefit. In 18, we're only getting a half a year benefit on that. And in 19, we're not budgeting that. We're not sure what will happen to that program. So we're not budgeting any benefit for those rebates in fiscal 19. But you can still see the program is good. We're at a lot lower fuel budget than we have been in the past. And that's all of my prepared comments. We'd be glad to answer any more questions.
Well, I just encourage you to continue to be prudent with the resources as you are, and it sounds like you're monitoring it closely. And I think even the study that we're talking about doing for paratransit is important. It comes back to that quote, without facts and data, you're just another person with an opinion.
Right.
It's important that we have data to be able to make sound decisions and to reflect back to the public why we make the decisions that we do.
Excellent work.
Yes.
Thank you.
So the direction would be to, are we going to do an abbreviated presentation at the board meeting or similar?
Whatever you'd like. We could do this one, or we could cut a few slides, or we're open.
I think it's okay.
So motion to approve the report? To take it to the board meeting?
Or the,
So it's possible action.
we received it and direct staff to present that.
Yeah, that's my motion.
We've received the presentation, we're directing staff to bring this before the full board. Motion on the floor, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion unanimously carries.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, your
This
next...
is the second time set aside for citizens' participation, public comment. I would really appreciate if someone stood up and said something.
You had a good meeting?
No one sure would want that. You got your picture lanyard on. Which I'll be yanking off later, no I won't.
And that is untouchable, by the way. All right, seeing and hearing no one, will close that portion of public comment. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.